Hey, so you've been wondering, what weapon should I play in Rise? Or maybe you've been playing for a while and you're not sure you made the right choice. Whatever the reason is you went looking for a Monster Hunter weapon tier list, it is my objective for you to leave this video with a basic understanding of what weapons are good, bad, and which ones you might be interested in picking up. But why is this the only tier list, or the only real tier list anyways? Well, if you look around, you might find that the most common form of tier list is something like this. Just one dude who played some of the weapons, just giving his personal opinion on his very limited experience with most weapons, except one or two. Which means they actually don't really have any more information on which weapon is good than any other average player that mains one weapon and plays maybe a secondary or two. There's also meme tier list and the actual tier list, the speedrunners tier list, but you have to understand that this is not a tier list for players. This is a tier list of what a weapon can achieve when played to absolute perfection, when you know everything about the monster and about your weapon, when you make no mistakes and get lucky on top. The best possible time achievable by the weapon. That is what the speedrun tier list ranks. And it's pretty good, but what I want to achieve is a proper tier list for the average player, not just speedrunners. I will, however, take the speedrun tier list into account when rating weapons. You can also find this kind of tier list, which I really recommend you go watch after this. It's fucking hilarious. It looks to me like this company just had an intern who had barely played the game and just had him give descriptions on all the weapons. Here's a fun game. Watch it after playing the game and see how many wrong things you can find in the video. Then read the comments and find the other 50 wrong things you missed. Anyways, what makes this tier list different? Well, I thought I wanted to base this tier list on actual data. So I decided not to only learn and make endgame sets for all of the weapons, but also to do several timed hunts with each of them. So I picked 6 endgame monsters and did 5 hunts for each one of those with every single weapon to get a data set to be able to compare them. Now, you might be thinking, wouldn't that take a lot of time though? Well,
yes.
But I'm already done with it, so I'm here to share my findings with you. There will be 3 different tier lists. One based on the data I collected, the speedrunners tier list, and the one that is just my personal enjoyment of the weapons and how I feel they perform in general. This is all you need to know about the data. We're playing with this cat and this dog on all weapons. We're going to eat before every quest, and to minimize skills not activating, we're using Dango tickets for every single hunt. We'll use this item loadout. I won't be using any specific counter builds, no aquatic or flying racism skills. We will be hunting Magna Malo, Balstrax, Narwa, Apex Rathalos, Apex Diablos, and Apex Sinogar 5 times each. And we're using the best general endgame build I could find or come up with for every weapon, which I will show you. So if you think that one of the weapons placed poorly due to an unoptimized build or maybe monster bias or lack of skill on my part, you can make that judgment on your own and reach your own conclusions. Because after all, that is the goal of this video. I'm not here to tell you that this weapon is amazing or that this weapon sucks. I will, but that is not the main point. I'm here to share with you the data that I've gathered over the last 6 months and the conclusions that I reached through that data. If you think I'm wrong or that the data is biased in any way, you can make your own adjustments to the tier list as you see fit. But you will understand better how each weapon in the game performs, and that is what we're here for. So with that being said, let's get on with it. The Captain Levi blades. Let's get started with the builds. And yeah, I said builds. This is an elemental weapon, so we'll have several builds. We will use this one on Magna Malo, this one on Balstrax, Apex Diablos, and Apex Sinogre, and this one on Narwa and Apex Rathalos. And here's the results. And honestly, I'm really happy with those times. The dual blades did really good, better than I was expecting, honestly. When looking at the speedruns tier list, I expected the dual blades to perform a bit worse, but I think it just comes down to ease of use. These weapons just feel nice to play. They're simple and you can dodge out of almost any attack in a heartbeat. In the speedrunning tier list, they rank in B, but in my tier list, they barely make it to A tier. In regarding personal enjoyment, what can I say? Run like Naruto, spin like Levi, stab the monster with your magic kunai that deals damage as you hit the monster and fucking explodes at the end? S tier. Now, if you identify with this image, you will love our next weapon. And that is not to say that the sword and shield takes no skill to play. No, wait. Yes, that's exactly it. This is literally a live feed of me playing SNS. Yeah, you can do cool combos that actually take skill. The thing is, since shield bashing doesn't use up sharpness and also bonks the monster, yeah, it does knockout damage, sorry Hammer. There's no reason to use anything else, so your DPS combo is literally pressing one button, and that's it. Well, you have your wire bug counter, but that is all you have. Other than that, I hope you like pressing the A button. Let's look at the numbers. The sword and shield gets an 8th place in the speedrun tier list and on the average times on my data sheet, which lands it in B tier on the speedrun tier list, and I will be placing it in C. As for my personal enjoyment, what can I say? It's a one button weapon. It feels nice every once in a while to just turn my brain off, but even while watching a YouTube video in the background, this weapon puts me to sleep. At least you have a counter move to keep you awake. Maybe I'll save it for when I'm high on horse sleeping pills. Not offensively bad, but not really good either. C tier. The lance is garbage. Yeah, there's just isn't too much to talk about here. The lance deals damage in two ways. Poke, 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 or wire back move, where you go bzzz, zoom, and then you do one big thrust at the end. That's it. Damage is subpar, and if you want to live the tank fantasy, okay, but you're better off leaving the monsters aggro to weapons that need to counter. Grabbing the aggro just to block with your shield isn't an amazing idea in my opinion, but what about the counters, I hear you ask? Well, the two counters on this weapon, being the small parry animation before you zoom around and the perfect timing block, are both so precise that I find it insane to pull them off consistently. You're better off putting that practice into another weapon. On top of that, the only reward for the parry counter is a small buff that lasts for a very short time. And the reward for the perfect block is a mediocre double hit. Anyways, here's the build I run for every monster. And here's the times and deaths. Yeah, it's a D tier. As for my personal enjoyment, this weapon somehow manages to be even less engaging than the sword and shield. You have one move, you zoom around with a wire bug. That's what you do 80% of the time. The other 20%, you poke. Very boring, not the worst, but awful nonetheless. D tier. But if you like this, don't let me tell you what you play. Go out there and zoom around all you like. You glue-eating motherfucker. Insect Glaive. It's pretty good actually. Fast, easy to dodge out of combos, and now with extra bonk. Yes, with the new assist type Kinsect, which essentially just hits with your weapon. You can pick a blunt damage Kinsect, and you're now a bonk weapon. It's okay, Hammer, don't cry. Yeah, Insect Glaive is good. It's very simple to play, just grab your buffs and do Tornado Slash. That's it. Here's the build I ran. And here's the timetable. Yeah, it's pretty good. I think its ease of use makes it better than it seems. Despite it being C tier in the speedrun tier list, it's a solid B for me. As far as my personal enjoyment, I love that they tried to make it an airborne weapon that stacks damage up by flying around. And I hate that they made Tornado Slash deal a lot more damage, so you can't really use the flying around stuff. Even then, it's pretty good. It's fun, it's simple, it works, and it barely makes it to A tier.
Here's Johnny!
This weapon is amazing. Yeah, it's way more complex than it needs to be, but once you get the gist of it, it's a lot simpler than it seems. It has a great counter, and the damage is actually pretty decent. The thing is, Charge Blade suffers from one problem, and to understand that, we need to understand two different types of monsters. There's submissive and breedable monsters like Pookie Pookie. You go out and they just sit there, waiting for you to pound them over and over until they're dead. They offer very little resistance and their attacks are slow and telegraphed. And then there's monsters that will fuck your shit up, like Apex Sinogre. You go up to it and it starts smashing the shit out of you and it doesn't fucking stop until either you're dead or he's dead. Against punching bag monsters, the Charge Blade feels like using a chainsaw to hunt a fucking chicken. You just go up to the monster like a dad about to fuck up a Thanksgiving turkey with an electric saw and go to town. But against aggressive monsters, you kinda struggle. I play the Charge Blade exclusively in Wild Axe mode, and it's pretty hard to find opportunities to beat down the monster with your bulky and slow axe. You can go into counter peak performance from axe mode if you're about to get hit, but usually aggressive monsters do several hits in a row, which means they smack the shit out of you after you block their first attack. So your only option ends up being hitting them on every opportunity, hoping you can get a knockout with your file damage, which thankfully is fairly easy. Sorry, Hammer. So overall, great weapon, good damage, but only if the monster is willing to take the damage. If they're not, it's a bit of a struggle. So here's the build. And here's the times and deaths. Charge Blade is a high C tier in the speedrun tier list, and for its complexity, it lands as a low C tier for me, right behind SNS. As far as personal enjoyment, I think it's a very high B tier. The Unga Bunga Ultra Element Discharge playstyle feels very nice, and the Soax mode feels even better. It's just a bit sad you end up struggling against aggressive monsters. Switch Axe just feels so amazing in Rise. In my experience, it handles every type of monster very well, and it has pretty great DPS. I think the best part of the Switch Axe is that the raw damage files are exhaust, which makes monsters attack less and stand around more often. And I think that really makes a difference in hard to deal with monsters like Apex Sinogre. Here's the builds. Dragon for Narwa and Rathalos, Ice for Diablos, and Exhaust for everything else. And here's the stats. In the speedrun tier list, this is rated just above dual blades, but for me, it's right behind them at the top of B tier. As far as personal enjoyment goes, the switch axe just goes inside the monster and starts pounding them hard before blowing its full load inside them. I just love the weapon's theme, and that's why for me, it goes at the very top of A tier. I've given a lot of shit to the hammer in this video about it not being the one weapon that bonks anymore. You know, the whole thing with most weapons being able to knock out now. And yeah, hammer might not be the knockout king anymore, but at least it actually deals very little damage as well. Yeah, hammer is just not a very good weapon. The best move it has is the Impact Crater, which looks fucking badass. You fly into the air, dealing damage in the way up, and then you fall down, smashing the shit out of the monster. But it just doesn't deal enough damage for the work it takes to pull it off. You have to charge your hammer, then pull the whole move off without being hit out of it or the monster moving. It's just too much work for not enough damage. You also have very little in the way of counters. You have the water strike and a couple of iframes when switching hammer forms. This weapon got pretty fucked. Here's the build. And here's the times. Hammer ranks second to last in the speedrun tier list, and I'm not shocked, to be honest. For me, it's the same thing. Hammer is F tier. As far as my personal enjoyment, I hope I never have to play this shit weapon again. It feels awful and unforgiving, while also not feeling rewarding when you do pull off the moves. I'd say it's as pleasant as finding a dead bug in your favorite's restaurant food. F tier. Hey guys, the Gunlance can fly! And that's all it does. No, really, it feels sluggish as fuck to play. The damage just isn't there. Look at this. This is Gunlance peak DPS combo. Yeah, it has very little bonk potential. It still has some though. Hammer. But other than that, the moves on this weapon are so fucked. It's truly a work of art. I have difficulty understanding the warped reasoning that made this weapon end up like this. Wyvern's Fire, the move that is supposed to be the highest damage on the weapon, deals no damage at all. You literally just end up not using it because it's a loss in DPS. The Silkbind skills are so incredibly bad. First one is you glide around with hyper armor, which means you still take damage, but you can't get knocked out of it, even though you can still get stunned out of it. And then you get the option to either do a worm stick that is slightly faster or a smash down to do a full burst combo. Oh, and your shells do a tiny bit more damage for like 60 seconds. That is the best Silkbind skill on the Gunlance. Now, remember how I complained about counter peak performance on the Charge Blade, leaving you vulnerable against combo attacks since you can't block more than one hit? Well, counter peak performance fills and loads your files and lets you go straight into Savage Axe mode or UAED. All you get on the Gunlance is a bit of extra sharpness. No, I'm not kidding. It doesn't even activate Protective Polish. And it still has the same downside as the Charge Blade, except you can't even dodge. So when a monster starts a combo, you either seethe your weapon, which takes about a fucking week, Or you just sit there and block and you still take damage. And if you were low on stamina, you're just fucked. Yes, I am angry at this weapon. I don't understand why anyone would play it. This is the weapon that I died the most with by a lot. I failed the Apex in Ogre quest 5 times before I got all 5 clears. And I fucking hated every moment of it. Even though this is the worst weapon in the game, according to the speedrun tier list, for me it still performed better than the hammer and another weapon we still haven't talked about. But considering that even when you play this weapon to absolute perfection, it still sucks ass, this is a clear F tier and by a long shot, the worst weapon in the game. As far as my personal enjoyment goes, fuck this weapon. Ah yes, the weapon of the billion counters. I don't know what Capcom was smoking when they thought of the changes they made to the Longsword. You still have Foresight Slash, and it's still amazing, making you take no damage or knockback and dealing damage while also charging your weapon. But the new EI Spirit Slash, oh boy, this Spirit Slash. This move used to be really hard to pull off, and if you pulled it off, your reward was just some damage. If you fucked it up though, not only did you get less damage, but you lost a level of charge on your sword. Well, now it's not only easier to pull off, but if you fuck it up, there's no penalty. But if you pull it off, oh boy, if you pull it off, not only do you get the damage, but you also get 1 charge level on your sword. And also, you get the option to go straight into the last part of your charging combo to get another charge on your sword. Which means that landing just one of these not only deals a lot of damage, but also gives you 2 levels of sword charge. Fighting monsters on this weapon feels so unfair. It's like you're just throwing them into a fucking blender. If the monster is not hitting you, you're dealing a lot of damage. If the monster hits you, you deal a lot of damage. If the monster falls down, you deal a shit ton of damage. It is no surprise that this weapon is the top melee weapon in the speedrun tier list, or that it ended up second on the average time charts for me. And yeah, I have to disclose, this is one of my main weapons, and yeah, this weapon does take some practice, but I think most players will be able to pull off some sick damage on this weapon after a couple of hunts. And that is why this weapon is an absolute S tier. As far as my personal enjoyment, yeah, I'm a weeb. I'm not ashamed. I fucking love the feel of this weapon, and it's going to be one of my top weapons for Rise. It's another S tier. Now, you know how a set Longsword feels like putting the monster into a blender? Well, how about a fucking gun that shoots blenders at the monster? That's pretty much what the LBG is. This really sells you on the fantasy of being that one guy that shows up at a medieval battle with a fucking assault rifle and just shits on everyone. Yeah, rapid fire slicing ammo. Is there anything else that I can say about this? This weapon is all about making the monster look like a Christmas tree while you watch it suffer for about 5 minutes before it just dies, and you just end up sitting there like, was that it? We do have to use a special build on Diablos, but it works just as well. This weapon is insane and takes almost no skill to pull off. You just aim and the monster dies. You don't even have to look at the critical distance indicator, because the slicing ammo does not care for critical distance. The slicing ammo has one mission only, to fuck up the monster, and it will fuck it up. This is the true American weapon, and it shoots its way to the 3rd best time on my datasheet. And the top 3 spot on the speedrun tier list at the top of A tier. As for me, this weapon as it is an easy S tier. But taking into account the ammo maintenance, and more importantly the fact that this specific bowgun is the one that is broken, you don't really have access to this destructive power until you kill Sinogre. And if the damage is not all there, then you will have to take the time to go back to camp to restock ammo, which considerably slows down hunts. And it's also worth considering that if you don't absolutely abuse the monster, then there is a really big chance that the monster will abuse you instead, since you're not all that mobile and you die very fast. So for this reason, this weapon makes it to the very top of A tier. As far as my personal enjoyment goes, I think this might be because I played this weapon after doing Gunlance and Hammer and all of the painfully bad weapons. But seeing that Sinogre just trashing around on the floor and knowing that as soon as he got up, all of my slicing ammo was going to do to his head what 1000 rubber bands do to a watermelon felt really satisfying in a way that I find hard to explain. S tier.
Big, meaty
chops! The big boy of Monster Hunter weapons, and for me, probably my most controversial placing. What is there to say about the Greatsword? This weapon is about being able to predict what the monster is going to do and land some big ass damage hits. But the problem with this is that unless your 5th eye has opened and you can see the future, this is impossible to do consistently. I hunted the same monsters over 100 times. I know their attack patterns, but that is not enough. So let me explain what it takes to pull off a real Greatsword hit. Well, first you need to catalog all of the possible moves for the monster by how large the opening after the attack is, so you know exactly what move to do. Then how to avoid it, which is easy enough. But then you have to know where the monster will attack and where the monster's weak spot will be when the attack ends. Once you know all of that, you have to know where to stand so that your 3rd charge attack will hit the place where the weak spot of the monster will be when it finishes its attack. And lastly, you have to fucking time it all so that your weapon and the monster's head are at the same spot at the same time. This is a weapon that demands absolute perfection from the player. But the thing is, a weapon that asks for a lot should give a lot back. And this weapon really doesn't. The speedrun tier list shows that even when played absolutely perfectly, it's still worse than the Longsword, while taking about tenfold the effort and time investment to learn. So yeah, the Greatsword in my opinion just isn't worth it for an average player. Even for a dedicated player, this is a weapon that caters to fucking masochists, the kind of people that think that having a maxed out RuneScape account is a fucking achievement. This weapon performed rather poorly for me, even though I practiced quite a bit and already knew all the monster attacks. So even if this is a B tier in the speedrun tier list, for me, it barely makes it out of F tier. But as far as my personal enjoyment goes, this weapon actually gets the Golden Nutcracker award. For I would rather put my ballsack in a hydraulic press than ever play this weapon again. Everything. From getting stunned while using Adamant Charge Slash to just missing True Charge Slash by a fraction of an inch because the monster decided to turn around at the last fucking second. Fuck all of it, and fuck this weapon. Now, if the LightBowGun is like showing up to a medieval battle with an assault rifle, this weapon is like showing up with a fucking missile launcher. And yeah, I'm sorry to keep clowning on the Hummer, but the real truth is that if this was a bonk tier list, the Hammer would barely make it out of F tier, while the HBG would be sitting in an entirely different tier list because it wouldn't want to share the same tier list with these filthy peasants. Words just cannot explain how absolutely ridiculous this weapon is. You land 3 grenades on the monster and that is enough to knock it down, and that's it. It's done. The monster will probably not get up again until it's dead. This weapon just feels like downright abuse. Every single monster you fight with this build spends more time on the floor than standing up, which means every monster on this list except for Diablos had a very bad time when I was playing the HeavyBowGun. But also, Diablos showcased to me the huge weakness of this weapon. If you don't have the sticky build, this weapon kinda sucks. It's very immobile and has no defensive capabilities if you don't take the shield, which means that you're stuck evading most of the time. This weapon is a solid S tier in the speedrun tier list nonetheless, and takes a very proud second place. But on my tier list, for the same reasons as the LBG and the added lack of mobility, gets a very solid A tier placement. As far as my personal enjoyment goes, I just don't like the bulky weapons that much. And as funny as it is to see the monster just laying there and able to do anything while I'm turning their heads into a very dangerous birthday cake, it gets old after a while. It's B tier. And we finally made it, the best weapon in the game. The bow just has it all in Rise. The only bad side to the bow is the amount of builds that you have to make for it. I went for rapid bows only, but with the choice between spread, penetrating, or rapid bows, it feels like you can have a bow build for every specific monster. But other than that, there's no negatives about this weapon. It seems to me that they outright removed the stamina management out of this weapon. With the proper skills and buffs, you can pretty much spam dash dance to your heart's content. And adding to that, they gave the bow an animation cancel that almost doubles its DPS. And on top of that, this skill bind move just straight up increases your damage and recharges stamina. And the other one just deals increased damage as well and can be used when you have no stamina at all. What is there to say? The bow is just too strong and Rise. It takes the #1 spot in the speedrun tier list and 4th on my datasheet, but still first in my tier list. I think bow is the weapon with the most potential. I'm going to say the reason it didn't come on top on my datasheet is that I didn't really use the proper bow for every fight. Regardless, taking into account that it's an amazing weapon all throughout the game, it has a very low skill floor while still being hard to master, and the utility of the coatings in multiplayer, the bow takes its well-deserved #1 spot on my tier list as well. As far as my personal enjoyment, well, I'm a bow main. Disclosing my bias right now, make of that what you will. #1, baby! Don't worry, I didn't forget about your hunting horn. The noble hunting horn. I just love the reworked version of this weapon. I just love the feeling of knocking down a monster. Yes, this is also better at knockout than hammer, but don't tell hammer mains. And I love going full fucking concert on a monster's head and then pulling off one of these. So I can go like, when I have the big damage buff, this weapon is just good. It's lovely to play and brings a lot to the table. Just think of it as a hammer that doesn't suck dick. This weapon landed number 9 on my average times, and it is placed at number 12 in D tier for the speedrun tier list. But you know what? Considering how good this weapon feels, and how much it offers in multiplayer hunts, I'm placing the hunting horn at the bottom of B tier. As far as my personal enjoyment goes, A tier. And that's it. Here are all the tier lists. What do you think? Am I a dumb fuck that only placed hammer in F tier because I suck at it? Is a greatsword bad because I'm a drooling inbred? Let me know in the comments below. I hope you found this video useful, and I hope to see you again for the updated tier list when Sunbreak releases. Bye bye!